huge evolution in the way we offer services and now supports. So it's been a gift to be able to share a lot of different aspects of the disabilities community with you guys through this content, and really thinking about how it can be relevant and timely given everything going on in the age of technology. So when we started dreaming about this, we went to Dustin. We have had a great relationship with him, both personally and professionally, and we just felt like Disability Cocoon would be the best platform to host this content. So we are just so excited to be doing this pilot right now and look forward to the national launch come this fall. So thank you guys for being the first to go through and giving us all your helpful feedback. It's really getting us where we need to be. So this morning, this particular webinar is your first webinar. And the goal of the 3 webinars is to give you an opportunity to come to the table, so to speak, meet with other professionals who are working on the certification and the accreditation, and really talk about particular issues around either some of the forms that we're offering, some of the knowledge and content, and or some of the practices. So this morning, our first one is focusing on assessment and person-centered planning. And up to this point, you have taken your first 3 courses, more than likely. And then you've also received a couple of documents, one being the screening matrix to use to help determine if teams are ready to start seeking integrating enabling technology. And then also an intake tool that we developed as a way to get you prepared for those technology assessments with vendors and other folks. So just wanted to get some general feedback, I think, to start on, has anyone started using those forms yet? And if so, would you like to share about how that's going?
You get the prize of being the first contributor
Right.
to the first webinar in Shift.
And don't forget to unmute yourself. I'm really bad to do that. Just go down to the bottom left corner and unmute yourself, and we're ready to roll. All right, let me reframe. Has anybody downloaded the forms yet and started taking a look at them for use in the future?
I have downloaded them.
Okay.
As far as assessment goes, within our organization, we've kind of developed this technology consult for our teams to consult with. We're kind of using the Ohio-based form initially, some of the questions off of that. But we'll still have to take a look internally as to how we proceed with this assessment form.
Okay. And really the screening tool, we developed that during a pilot we were doing with the state of Tennessee, because the one barrier we were hearing over and over again is we get down the road with the process, and then there will be 1 or 2 team members who say, hold on, we're not ready to explore this technology. And so we thought if we developed this screening, it would people could initiate those conversations earlier in the ballgame and start determining how comfortable people are with discussing enabling technology, as well as their willingness to integrate it. And then the second form, the intake, is something that we've been using at Simply Home for quite some time. And we thought it might be helpful to broaden it just a bit and include it in this project, so that you guys get a feel for what kind of basic information is a technology vendor or someone who's doing a tech assessment, what they'll need to help get them going to start thinking about the types of enabling technology that will be suitable for the outcomes you're seeking. So those were the 2 reasons why we created those, and then felt like they would be a good way to get you guys started in the project. Is there anyone on here who is from Tennessee who has used these forms, one or the other, and would be willing to share some feedback? Okay. All right, so then talk to me a little bit about what you currently are doing to prepare for technology assessments at your organization, or even, are you even at that spot yet?
And please don't forget to unmute yourself.
This is Miranda with Emory Valley Center. We're still pretty new to the remote supports and things like that. We have the forms downloaded, and we're actually having a meeting soon with someone that will, excuse me, use those forms for. But right now it's kind of based off what they've seen, and the individuals kind of suggest what they would like to try. And that's just in our early stages.
Okay, that sounds good. So Miranda, how do you guys see implementing some of these forms? Do you see it as being a team approach, or do you see one particular person in Emory Valley taking the lead in overseeing kind of the implementation of the forms?
Well, for now, it's just one person. It's actually me.
Okay.
We created a new position at Emory Valley because our tech kind of was slowly progressing. It was very, very, very slow because everybody has different things they have to do in their current jobs. So creating this new position kind of opened up that free time to really put something together and get it on the ball.
Sure, sure. Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Appreciate that. So in terms of those of you who have downloaded the forms and looking at them, how are you feeling in the capacity of being able to use them in the day-to-day process of person-centered planning?
I haven't personally used the forms yet, but I really do see the advantage of the Are You Ready matrix, because we had just a small conversation with a guardian and a provider on, we didn't really open the ballpark about technology, but just sort of mentioned it. And they were people coming like this. So I think that it's a good idea, to bring that forward and have those discussions before considering, and have everyone's concerns on the table and provide that education that it suggests. I think that's a great opening to any discussion.
Yeah.
Did it give you kind of a starting place, I guess, to some structure on how to frame the conversation in a way that you weren't walking in blind?
Actually, the conversation happened before I had seen the form. So it made me think back to, once I saw the form, it made me think back to that conversation and think, I think education is where we should probably be starting with this particular member. So in all those party areas, and maybe some type of presentation. So to maybe bring some comfort. So yeah, that's really my only experience so far with just thinking that it would have been useful.
And Margaret, I appreciate that point, that using education as a starting tool. I think we've seen over time with providers, and especially providers who ended up being very successful with technology, is they weren't the providers that jumped right in to, let's buy a whole bunch of technology because we've got grant funding and put it in place and then expect everybody to learn about it. They really decided to look at a grant, figure out how to build in that education piece and all of the materials or forms they might need to help guide their team, and then move into those conversations before they went into purchasing technology. So I appreciate your sharing that point. Has anybody else started working with using that education piece or communication piece as a tool for preparing folks for that enabling technology transition?
Stacy from Inclusa. I would say I haven't used any of the materials thus far, but I think there's a group of us at Inclusa that have been meeting for about a year, just really learning about technology. And I think in some of our conversations with teams, we have jumped to technology as the solution before always doing kind of that person-centered work of, understanding the individual's goals, what their outcomes are, and just using technology as one of the options to support their outcomes. So I think it kind of, for me, grounded me a little bit. Like, we get so excited. We've been learning about technology and how it can support people, but to kind of back up and really understand what the individual's goals are, and then figure out whether technology of some sort might meet that goal. So I think personally for me, it's just like back to basics. Like, we know how to do person-centered planning, and technology is just one of those options. So I think for me, having those conversations with teams, members, anyone really, it's about what's that individual's outcome, and then talking about the options and providing that education as we go, instead of just trying to like, here's some technology and overwhelming the individual. So it's just one of many options, and it's nothing to be scared of, and taking the time to provide that education. So for me, the training thus far is like, just slow down, go back to what you know, and then utilize the enabling technologies as an option to support them.
Yeah, it's interesting when sometimes providers will say that exact same thing, Stacey. They're like, on everything else that we do, we go slowly, we educate people, we do this. But when it comes to technology, it was like we wanted to buy all this fancy, cool stuff and put it in place, and then none of it was appropriate. And so I think that's a critical point about person-centered planning as we apply it to enabling technology, that it truly still is about the person and their desires for their lives. And if we don't think about those first, then we lose the whole concept of what enabling technology means. So what about, while we're on the topic of person-centered planning, what are some other strategies or practices? I'd like to hear more about other organizations and what you're using as a part of a person-centered approach to the technology. Okay, so I'm looking over in the chat box, and Michael says, I'm currently reviewing all of our individuals and their outcomes to see where we can dig in more and start doing these full assessments. That's great.
I'm guessing that COVID has probably slowed down everybody's ability to get out and actually meet with people and start using some of this stuff.
Yeah. Has COVID, for anyone, has COVID kind of maybe triggered the possibility of using technology where you may not have considered it before, especially because of the remote support piece? See a lot of heads nodding.
Yeah, it was a trigger in our organization. In fact, I mean, part of the reason I joined the support group that Stacey discussed in Inclusa was because of the COVID, and some of our members just really feeling isolated from their supports, both professionally, say mental health counseling, that sort of thing, and then just personally, their family members, that they couldn't visit, and they're maybe feeling anxious and disconnected. And so just something as simple as a tablet, some of them actually already had that, and we just had to figure out how to support them. But then digging more into those that didn't and trying to see if we can assist in those ways. So I think COVID has brought at least that forward for our organization.
Great. That's great. Anyone else wants to share?
For those of you that are maybe not comfortable speaking out loud for the group, you can throw a comment in the chat, and Cameron or I will get that to everybody. So.
Well, I'd just like to say, from talking to some of the agency directors, enabling technology has been used a lot more, in the homes with the people we support, as far as maintaining contact with family members, activities that they've been involved in just due to the COVID and not being able to get out into the community, which I think is a real asset. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, the COVID has prompted, more use of enabling technology.
It's good to hear.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to say, I'm looking at this, the screen matrix. Mm-hmm. And on the second set of questions, I see that we have community partners listed here. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't see natural supports. And I'm assuming that's what we're meaning here.
Right. So,
or are we? Is that what we mean?
The community partners could be natural supports, as in, neighbors, landlords, sure, employers. And then I think we have, I don't have that form right in front of me, Stanley. So on there maybe is a place for parents or guardians or conservator, like something geared more towards a family piece. Is that correct?
There is, okay. But I think it would be a good idea to add natural supports on there.
Okay, we can do that. We sure can. Thank you for that feedback. That's really helpful. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's take a few baby steps back, since I know it sounds like some of you have looked at the forms but haven't had a chance to really dive in and understand why. So let me just throw out this basic question. How do you approach person-centered planning around the topic of enabling technology? What might be the first thing that you would do either in communication or amongst the team or with the person with disabilities?
For us at Emory Valley, we always start with the Circle of Support meeting, and that's where we begin to discuss enabling technology.
Miranda, will you define Circle of Support for the full webinar in case other folks aren't familiar with that term?
Sure. The Circle of Support that we have at Emory it could include people from Emory Valley, natural supports, family members, and the individual in their ISC.
Okay. And the ISC, is that like a support coordinator, a care manager?
Yes.
Okay. So starting with the Circle of Support, that's one practice. What else? What are some of your other organizations here doing in terms of those initial person-centered conversations?
So within Inclusa, we have a very similar structure. We meet twice a year with what we call our interdisciplinary team, which sounds very similar. Includes a nurse care manager, a social worker care manager, the member or their natural supports that wish to participate, any providers that wish to participate in that meeting. And that's where we discuss the members' outcomes and their care plan, review everything, all of the supports they have in place to be sure they're meeting their needs, talk through everything that they've got going on, anything new with them, just kind of see if there's anything that's come up. And I think that would be most likely often the place where we might just start to discuss technology as an option if it would seem to meet an outcome. Mm-hmm. So very similar, I think, sounds to what was just mentioned.
So Margaret and Miranda, when you start those conversations, do you have a structured format, or is this a more casual sit down and chat with the member or the self-advocate and the team?
For us, our first meeting may be a little more casual, just to kind of to introduce enabling tech and see if that's something they were even interested in. And then we may call for another Circle of Support meeting and include someone from a vendor and let them talk about what technologies are available that could help with their concerns.
Okay.
Well, I know for us, we just start with the simplest thing, and that's just to talk to the person.
Yeah.
And see if that's even an option for them before we move on.
Nice.
Before we even go to the circle.
And Heather, what are some of the questions or topics you might approach during that initial casual conversation?
It can be anything from, anything that they're maybe having something that's, it's easy for me to say I'm with the person-centered unit. So things that are, important to them, like their daily routines, things that are working for them or that they want to improve on.
Sure.
And especially now with the COVID and things that might be available to help them with that and that they would be comfortable with. And give them a chance to say, I've seen this, or I'm comfortable with using something, and I don't want to say her name too loud because she's going to pipe up in the background, but something with like Alexa or, or a phone or the doorbell. Because I know that, and I've been guilty of it, but finding that sometimes the folks that we're talking to are far more capable than we've given them credit for. But just, really really just starting with the person, and letting them take the lead. So when we go to that meeting, they're prepared to really advocate for themselves.
Sure. And I appreciate that point, Heather. I think because I'm in the vendor industry now, as opposed to the direct support like I used to be, I think we have a tendency in the vendor industry we see a lot of different types of teams and a lot of different ways people do person-centered planning. And I feel like sometimes we forget, in our excitement to support somebody with technology, we forget to ask them what they're comfortable with or what outcomes they really want to address. Like, we may know that they need some cooking safeties options, but their biggest concern may be, I want to use transportation to get to the public library. And sometimes we forget how to ask those good questions, but then also give them the opportunity to have the language and the resources to self-advocate. And what does that look like at the Circle of Support meeting? How do we create those opportunities for self-advocacy? So thank you for sharing that. That's really important.
And one other concept that I don't know if anybody has done this or not, but looking for local lending libraries. Once you do drill down to kind of understand exactly what the person needs, you can go to a local lending library, like through your state ATAC program, to get devices so that individuals can play, and you can really start to learn exactly what their preferences are that way too.
Yeah. In fact, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amber.
That's okay. I'm with Tennessee's accreditation unit, and we use personal outcome measures as part of our accreditation data. And we've had a lot of people that through the interview process with personal outcome measures will find that their goals toward independence, their goals to really just maybe be able to do more for themselves in their home, or to be able to do transportation on their own, or have time without staff. And a lot of times that'll be the initial thing in our assessment that we'll put in there for the Circle of Support to take a look at enabling technology. I think for as state employees, it's a little bit different, definitely, than a provider that might have more interaction there directly, to do everybody. But that's
Sure.
one area for sure.
Yeah, I just put in the chat, Amber, what personal outcome measures is. An actual tool that was developed by a group called CQL. And you can go on their website and be trained and accredited in the personal outcome measures interview tool. And I know when we've worked with several organizations across the United States who have used that as their primary source of assessment prior to the technology piece. And it's amazing how it has spurred conversations with self-advocates about what they truly want in their lives. If you've not seen the video that Simply Home has about a gentleman named Steve, you can go to the YouTube, and go to our Simply Home Systems page. We have a video on there about a man in New York named Steve, and the organization knew him really well and had worked with him for a very long time, but until they did the POMs, or the personal outcome measures, they had no idea that he wanted to live independently. And that tool became a way for him to learn how to self-advocate and find the language he needed to let them know that. So it's a great opportunity to have those kind of in-depth conversations in a way that's appropriate and gets to the heart of what their priorities are. So any other strategies folks are using to begin those conversations that are person-centered, so that we keep the self-advocate at the heart of this process?
Yeah, Cameron, this is Milton. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we sure can.
Sorry, I was jumping in and out here, but thank you for those folks from Tennessee that have been chiming in. And being part of our enabling technology program, we have taken a lot of these ideas that with the POM and the person-centered tools and the person-centered practices, and we have actually incorporated it into our program as a enabling technology person-centered meeting. And so what we have done is the very first meeting, if somebody's showing interest in enabling technology, we use those person-centered tools, and we basically have our whole meeting just focused on using those tools, focused on different technology solutions. So for example, we start out with first asking the people, you know, what are their outcomes and goals towards using enabling technology? And so right away, we try to address, okay, this has to be outcome and goal oriented. And then we go through the daily routines. And just like a person-centered tool with going through daily routines, you can see what they do daily, and then we try to see how technology can help support people in their active daily routines with being more independent to reach those outcomes. And so just focusing those daily routines on how can technology then support the person with those daily routines is a big thing. Of course, important two and important four is really the key towards these person-centered tools. And then we also ask what makes sense and what doesn't make sense with technology for the person. Because some things may make sense for some people, but may not make sense for other people. And especially if you're talking about different notifications, styles, different styles of technology. Some people like those, you know, those really nice screens, touchpad screens, but other people like tactile stuff like buttons and things they can actually feel. So there's a lot of things that do make sense or doesn't make sense for people. And it's good to hear it directly from that person that, hey, I'd rather have this type of technology rather than this one, so we know exactly a good fit for the person. And a lot of times we help people understand the differences by showing them videos of different technologies or pictures of different technologies. Sometimes we actually bring in examples of different technologies so they can actually touch things and feel things and see how they act and point out what they like about different things. And it's something as simple as them saying, hey, I like that because it's orange, gives us an idea that, okay, if we can find this device in orange, they're going to have more ownership of it and want to use it more often. And so we take all that information. We then try to do our matching tool within person-centered. You know, a lot of people use matching tools for like staff and for like job placement maybe, but we use the matching tool for technology. So we say, okay, what support needs do they have? And how can we match the technology with those support needs? What kind of characteristics of technology are they looking for? Just like, you know, characteristics in personality, there's characteristics of technology that people like or don't like. And then finally, we talk about their current technology interests. Do they have cell phones? Do they have iPads? Do they have something that we can, you know, relate new technology to what they're already using? So there's a lot of things that we have done with the person-centered tools to make them more geared and focused towards talking about technology. And it was a great fit. And there's and if you use those tools just with the focus of technology, it really opens up that conversation for people.
Nice. Thanks, Milton.
Yep.
I like that idea, the matching piece, and thinking about what supports can match with what outcomes. That's great.
Yeah, and when you put it together all in the tool, it lines up, and people can see it a lot better how a technology can help support somebody when you match it according to its properties and characteristics and the support that it actually it's providing.
So Tina just said in the chat, yes, that matching piece was great. So that brings me to this, and Milton, maybe you can expand a little bit for us. You know, I know when we jump into these discussions on enabling technology, we also run into some barriers. And how does that tool, or perhaps other strategies or practices anyone here is using, have you run into any barriers, and how do certain tools or conversations help you navigate those barriers that may be challenging for you?
Yeah, and so I'll just, one of the tools that we use for barriers or trying to find solutions is is that tool that says what does work and what doesn't work, or what makes sense or what doesn't make sense. It's a very good tool for seeing, seeing how people view technology from different perspectives. Because the family member may come back and say, hey, this doesn't make sense to us having, this type of technology in the home. But then you see it from the perspective of the person, they come out and say, no, I really want that in my house. And so then it becomes a negotiation tool where, okay, it makes sense to the person supported. It may not make sense to the family at this point. Well, maybe we need to provide a little more education and a little more learning on what that device can actually do for the person, so that maybe the family member can become more comfortable with it, or maybe there's other alternative that makes sense to both of them. But being able to do what makes sense, what doesn't make sense from everybody's perspective, it really lays out how people look at technology, what people want from different perspectives, and starts that conversation of how you can negotiate coming up with different technology solutions for people. That's the biggest tool that we use when it comes to issues.
Nice. Anyone else want to share any barriers or challenges they've faced in having these conversations?
I think Milton's completely correct on the perspective, because in our training there was a quote about technology makes things for us easier, but for people with disabilities makes things possible. And that's completely true when you change how people view technology, because for us, just a Ring doorbell, we might be able to just see somebody outside the home, but for them, it creates that independence of being able to stay at home and actually have the safety portion from that. And that's kind of what we've tried to change, how our direct supports view technology, that it's not just something extra or something fancy that they're getting. It's actually going to make their life amazing, can create so many possibilities.
Well, one thing I just wanted to add, that when you talk about the working and not working tool, and we talk about reevaluating the outcomes, you don't necessarily have to wait until a year or 6 months if you see that it isn't working. And so you go back in and use that, what's working and not working, to come to a different outcome. And that's something, that the entire circle of support would be involved in.
Yeah, Stanley, that's a great point. I think having been in this disabilities world for so long, we look at ISPs or IEPs, IFSPs, all of those support forms, and we think we can only take a look at the outcomes once a year at annual review time, when really we should be looking at this as a continuous improvement plan. And so that we are constantly updating, that it's more of a living document, that we're updating those outcomes as we see growth and priorities for people's lives changing. Then it's time to reevaluate the technology too, and have those discussions, and not wait until the next year comes around before we reassess what's going on. So in terms of barriers, any other barriers that people want to share? I know when we did the 3-year Tennessee project, boy, we we hit a lot of communication barriers the first go round. So open to hearing more. What about people? I know the two greatest concerns that we experienced through Tennessee were through conservators or family members, and then ISCs, which is what they reference their support coordinators or their care managers as. Have any of you run into a particular population or a particular team member role that creates a challenge in terms of approving the use of enabling technology?
I think one of the areas that's come up here in our family care program is that internet is not necessarily in benefit for our package, for our program, and seems like a pretty necessary thing in a lot of cases to get this stuff to work correctly or properly. So it's kind of an out of benefit item for us. And affordability becomes an issue at times. So that one is something we can look at, I guess, out of benefit if absolutely necessary, but that's been a bit of a barrier that we've needed to look at.
So for those of you that are on the state of Ohio, and this is not going to be a quick solution to that, Margaret, but the state of Ohio has actually broken down that barrier with CMS, and CMS is willing to pay for internet services through a waiver program. Your state would obviously have to amend your waivers, which will take some time, but CMS will approve that with the appropriate language. So if any of you are struggling with that as well, that's something that you could advocate for within your waiver programs.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, Margaret, because here in the state of Tennessee, we're actually looking at updating our waiver services to include enabling technology. And one of the things that we've been talking about is the inclusion of internet services for some of these situations where people either can't afford it or it's necessary for enabling technology. And one of the biggest things is just that we, in our definitions, we need to make sure that people are using that internet service for the technology solution and not just for personal use. And so it's a very tricky conversation, but it can be done. And if you do it correctly, then it can be very beneficial, especially in remote areas where people may not get or be able to afford those internet services.
That's great, Milton.
So I'm looking at the time, and I know we've got about 20 minutes. I wanted to step back for a minute, if it's okay with you guys, and ask you how you feel like things are coming along in terms of preparing to move into your ETIS project and using these forms for that. And do you have enough guidance to be able to begin the process? All right.
Actually, I have one clarifying question.
Yeah.
Going through the project, you want us to use these specific forms, correct? Is that correct?
You can, yes. We want you to incorporate the screening matrix, the intake, and the individual technology integration planning piece. But if you want to add, modify, include any of the documents that you guys have in place or that you are also considering, please feel free to do that. We just wanted to give you a basic structure of 3 documents that could walk you through a person-centered planning approach. But we are more than happy to review whatever else you include as a part of that packet. That's a great question, though. Thanks, Jerry.
And Cameron, when they're, and this may be getting a little ahead, but as they complete those projects, they submit the project through Shift, correct?
Right. So the way that we've done that is I've set up a course that is just that project, so to speak. And when you go into that course at the end of all of this, then it gives you a place to upload your documents and an opportunity for me then to download them, review them, and get you feedback. So it will be its own standalone course. It will not be attached to course 4 or whatnot.
So Cameron, I just want to clarify. So when we're going through this project, I know the state of Tennessee, we do have the availability for people to request funding for some of these technology solutions. But as we go through these projects, we don't actually have to find somebody that wants a technology, or not necessarily wants, but would want to go through the whole process. We're just kind of using these forms as examples, right?
Right.
I know we have a different situation here in Tennessee, but I just wanted to clarify whether or not we had to go through the whole process of from beginning to end.
Sure. I think the goal here is if you have individuals who are interested, that using these forms can do a couple of things. One, it can get you on the approach to making that request when it becomes possible. Two, it can actually offer it can offer data and support resources that say this is why this person would benefit from technology and why we want funding. But three, it also gives you the capacity to apply what you're learning to real people out there, as opposed to a case study that may not have the same kind of ownership you would have if you were working with somebody that you know their story. So even if the funding may not be in place right now, or you are doing this to prepare yourselves for what's to come in your state, our hope would be that you would use an actual person that then this may benefit them in some form or fashion, either now or down the line. Are there any questions about next steps and going through using these forms that we've got? Okay, so I've got some questions here. One, Michael says, I was going to do a test case using these forms. Would it be possible to submit that test case and get feedback before diving into the project fully? So the goal of the webinars was to be able to bring this kind of information to the table and get feedback then and there, so that we're not having to field a lot of extra work for review. But Michael, I get that this is a pilot and we're trying to understand what supports people need as a part of this training. So how about this? Michael, if you want to submit a test case, then we can use it, if you're willing, we can use it as an example and put it on the website, and folks can get a feel for how that looks and what that might, if it's moving in the right direction. Are you comfortable with that, Michael? Because what Dustin and I do is, this is one of many hats for us. While we love doing Shift, we also have lots of other pieces and parts to our jobs, just like you guys do. So we're trying to avoid taking in a lot of extra moving pieces and then have to also do the rest of our work. So I'm glad to do an example on the website so that you guys can get a feel for what we're looking for and what would be moving.
And Michael, I just threw the email address in the chat. If you do want to do that, just send your draft project there and take a look at it. We'll make sure Cameron gets it.
And then Amanda asked, if we have several people in the agency working on this pilot, do we all have to upload the plan, or one per agency? So there's two pieces there. Every person who's doing the ETIS certification needs to be having one person, one self-advocate that they're going through this process with. In terms of the organization tech plan, you only need to write one tech plan for the organization. But in order to give the ETIS person credit, we need to have them uploaded as well, just because sometimes our ETIS folks will not be affiliated with an organization, so they're seeking out folks to do that tech plan with. So it may feel like it's redundant if you are an organization that has several ETIS folks going through, but I need you to upload that organization tech plan as well as your ETIS work as a part of, to be able to get your certification. Does that make sense? Dustin, did that make sense?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Two projects. One is an individual project for the ETIS. The second project is an organization project, or there's only one, correct?
Right. Any other questions today?
While you guys are thinking of questions, let me get something in here real quick. If you are joining through Shift, meaning that you went to the assessment webinar course within Shift and clicked on that and then found today's session and clicked the join button within Shift, you are good to go. You will get credit for attending this webinar today. No action is required. If you are one of those people that could not find that or could not see that, apologize. And you joined by just clicking a link in an email or a link that I had sent to you, please email me. And my email address, I'll throw it in there again, but it's at the beginning of the chat. I just want to make sure that everybody gets credit for attending this. And for some of you that are attending, your username is like DD20530, and I can't tell who you are. So if you don't email me, I'm not going to know who you are. I'm not going to be able to go in and get you credit. So if you join through Shift, you're good to go. If you clicked a link outside of Shift to join this webinar, then I do need you to just drop me a quick email with your email address. All you have to do is say, I attended the assessment webinar, and I'll make sure that you get credit. So throwing my email address in there now. Back to you, Cameron, with the questions.
I do have one question. I know we've got technology vendors who are part of this project. Is there any technology vendor on today or a representative from a technology vendor who has any additional feedback to offer as to what is helpful when you go into an assessment with an organization? What kind of information is helpful in preparing for that system recommendation? All right, I'm not hearing anybody.
I can go back a few years when I was.
Yeah, please. That'd be great.
Yeah, so I was the executive director at Rest Assured for about 13 years. So I did a lot of those team meetings from the vendor's perspective. And most of the time when you're walking in there as a vendor, you're kind of going in not knowing anything, really. You don't know the individual. You don't know the team dynamics. You don't know what the person's home may look like. You don't know what other activities the person's involved with. And you as the vendor kind of have to start to pull all of that stuff out of the team sometimes to really get a clear picture of what's happening. So I think that hopefully the way that we've designed these forms, the way that Cameron designed these forms, will kind of shortcut that process for the vendor and get them some information that is really helpful. And you guys can help guide the conversation and make sure that that vendor is staying person-centered, because if you have one vendor coming in, I can tell you they're going to try to find a way to fit their product or service into that individual's life. And they probably can, but I think these forms will help everybody kind of stay person-centered. So.
Yeah, having done the assessments for Simply Home for a while, I think the biggest barrier for us occurs when organizations call and feel like they're ready, but then they don't have any information organized. And so we spend a lot of time kind of hemming and hawing on a conversation, which really then sets the individual and the family and the natural supports up for failure, because then they're like, this doesn't feel organized, what's going on? So being able to have those pieces in place, which is one reason why we included these forms as a part of this certification process, having those pieces in place and going into the tech meeting or the tech assessment with a vendor is going to help the self-advocate, the natural supports, the family, all feel like this is a positive, coordinated process, as opposed to nobody really knows what they're doing and creating that feeling of instability or insecurity. So making sure that you have that information ready when you go into the vendor process is great. It's really helpful.
Would it be helpful if we created a vendor, I don't know how to say it, vendor interview form that kind of reflect the questions in the vendor interview form reflected some of the principles that are taught around this whole person-centered approach to technology? Would that be helpful? Cameron, sorry, I'm kind of going off the cuff.
No, please. I know. Dustin's like, would it be? And by we, he means me, folks.
Cameron, can you do that, please?
I know. Go ahead, Milton.
So Cameron, I'm glad you bring that up, because like I was saying before, we usually have a person-centered meeting before ever talking to the technology vendor, so that we can get some of this information to the family members for them to be you know, a little more understanding about, you know, what the vendor's going to be talking about when they are asking these questions about technology, and basically to set them up to, like Dustin was saying, to be able to do that interview without having any questions. And so we always recommend having that initial person-centered meeting with the person to go over those person-centered tools so that they know exactly what type of technology they're looking for, you know, what the goals and outcomes that they're wanting to meet, and so to be able to answer those questions with the vendor. And we also include some other questions just that we know that vendors are going to ask, like, hey, if you're looking at a video doorbell, do you have an existing doorbell? What does the structure, you might want to start thinking about, what does the structure of your house look like, so that, you know, they can understand where technology will be located in your house. Maybe, you know, do you have internet, and whether or not that is an issue going forward. So these are other things that we also talk about, just to make sure that they are ready and prepared for that, that meeting with the technology vendor, like Dustin was saying, having some of these other check boxes checked before having that meeting.
Yeah.
There is a lot to consider when talking about technology.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing that's been kind of floating around, and I just want to say it in the back of my mind as we've been talking, is when you're sitting in that team meeting, I feel like everybody feels like in that team meeting that we have to make a decision, and we're going to do technology or we're not going to do technology.
Mm-hmm.
And if we choose technology, it's going to be forever. And this is going to just fundamentally change the person's life forever. What if it doesn't work? It doesn't have to be forever. So don't ever go into that team. That's one of the barriers that I always, as a vendor, I guess, saw, is that don't ever walk into that team meeting thinking that your decision is forever. You know, you can try this stuff for a week or two and not implement it. Don't change service authorizations even. Go to a lending library, get a device, get something, and just start dabbling. So
Right. Go to a demo home, or if people already have technology in their homes in your area, take self-advocates over there and let them get a feel for what that looks like. I know I was up in Illinois and with an organization, and actually went on a home visit with one of the support coordinators. She took a self-advocate over to a home that had 3 gentlemen living in it with technology. And they gave him a tour around their house and walked him through and told him what they didn't like, what needed changing, what they did like, how it helped them be independent. And, you know, those kinds of interactions. And his mom was actually with him too. And watching her face and her body language as these 3 young men were giving the tour, those kinds of interactions can be very powerful. Even watching story videos of the self-advocates themselves talking about the value of technology. Don't underestimate the value of those as a part of your person-centered planning process, and including them as a part of the meeting. Let's start our meeting watching this 5-minute video so we can all be on the same page about what the possibilities are, what the potential is for this. I would strongly encourage that. And then I just want to, Miranda had a comment here before we close out. She said, I agree these forms will for sure help with the organization piece. I know for us there was lots of confusion in the beginning between us and the provider and the vendor. It was a little unorganized. So this will definitely open conversations that are needed in the beginning of the process. So thanks, Miranda, for sharing that.
that's also going on the website, Miranda.
Yeah, I know, right?
Just kidding.
Yeah. So it's 11:59. Don't want to hold anybody up. Want to thank you guys for being here today. We're going to have another webinar tomorrow, and then we will be posting the recorded webinars for folks who were unable to make it, or if you need to go back and want to hear what day 2 sounds like, and see what kind of information they share. So we thank you for being here today. Any other feedback before we move on?
Please email me if you are attending outside of shift so we can get you credit. Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, we really appreciate y'all.
Thanks for
Thank
going
you.
through this with us. Yeah. Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Great job.